Copper Falls State Park. They were also called the soil soldiers, the boys in green. I met a woman up in Door County. She said we called them the crazy khaki kids. She used to write love letters to her girlfriend and put them underneath the stones at the entrance to Peninsula Park. And he'd have the truck driver get out and stop, and he'd run out and exchange love letters with his girlfriend. But my favorite nickname is Dollar a Day Boys. That's what they were paid, $30 a month. But the genius of the program was $25 was sent home to their families to help their mothers and dads and their brothers. And the stories they told me, paid the back taxes, paid my parents' mortgage, put my sister through teacher's college. But overwhelmingly, it put food on the table for a lot of people. And this is important to remember because a lot of people in the Depression were too proud to accept relief. You guys remember that. And they would rather starve. You go away, we don't want your money. You take our son to fight in your war. They didn't want to have it. But if they had a son out there building roads or planting trees, they took that money. And we'll never know how many people it kept from starving. The average CC boy had 6 to 7 dependents. So if you do the math, 3 million times 6 or 7, you're talking 18, 20 million dependents back home. It put food on the table. So the CC's was a relief program as much as it was a work program. I'll never forget a fellow coming up after my talk, and he shook my hand. I wasn't in the C's, but my brother was. That $25 a month put food on the table for my 11 brothers and sisters. Kept us alive. I served American style. Now, they also had bakers in every camp. You had pudding, pie, cake. By the way, gals, if they burned the vanilla pudding, they called it butterscotch. I've been to 5 national reunions, and I remember meeting this fellow once. He said he was out in Idaho. He said, we had an old lumberjack baker. He made the most delicious cinnamon rolls. He said, one day I peeked in the back of the door, and I watched him as he was rolling the dough. He said, that old lumberjack had no teeth, and he chewed tobacco like this. And the tobacco juice was just dripping down his chin. He said, I never ate those cinnamon rolls again. Oh, brother. And then the fellow told me how one of the guys was eating cake. They used to bake these big sheet cakes. And, oh, there's raisins in this cake, fellas. Well, those weren't raisins. Those were cockroaches. Oh. The food was good. The food was plentiful. There were some complaints. I've run into stories. Some guys went on strike because they served them spaghetti for 2 weeks straight. Another camp, they went on strike because they served them beans every day. You had situations where there were cooks skimming, but generally speaking, as this gentleman in the back said, the food was plentiful and it was good. It was regular food. Nothing fancy, nothing fancy. Anyway, one fellow told me, he said, I felt like shouting hallelujah when I walked into that mess hall. I was so happy. So I said, that sounds like a song. And if you want to, you can join me on the chorus. The chorus goes, if my stomach could talk, it would shout hallelujah. Let's hear you. Come on. Hallelujah. There you go. It's Sunday. We can get away with this, okay, Melissa? Way back in the Great Depression, my stomach was in a mild recession. Folks were poor. People were hungry. Couldn't get work all over the country. Well, Franklin D. built for you and me some work camps called the CCC. Put us to work, fed our bellies with lots of food like bread and jelly. Here we go. If my stomach could talk, it would shout hallelujah. If you ask me to walk, I'm gonna come running right to ya, 'cause it's chow time. Bear. Up in Eagle River, in 1 week, they saved the lives of 2 children from drowning. 2 separate incidents. A 3-year-old fell off a dam, and a young girl fell off a raft. In 1 week. That brought a lot of goodwill. I was in Hinckley, Minnesota 2 months ago. A woman told me how her 3-year-old brother wandered away from their home one night, and the mother was frantic. He wandered out in the woods. They couldn't find him. They called the CCs. 400 of them fanned out into the woods. They found him at 2:30 in the morning, 2 miles from home. in the woods covered with mosquito bites. I can go on and on. You know, if there was an accident on the highway, they would send an ambulance out and pick them up and take them to the hospital. You know what I'm talking about. A lot of good deeds. So they won over the locals. And if you go through the old CC newspapers, you'll see the Majestic Theater welcomes CCC boys. You know, Elmer's Drugstore welcomes CCs. Of course, they spent their money, but they were also grateful for them, for the good deeds they were doing. I was up in Hayward, Wisconsin last summer and at the Lumberjack Museum, and there was a little CC display in the corner, and on the wall was a poem. And the name of the poem was Wood Ticks. And that was one of the bad nicknames they gave the CCs. One fellow told me, I've heard this from two different stories, that you'd be walking down the street with your shovels going back to camp, and he said this German woman shoot her children in the door, then she turned on these guys and said, "Wood ticks, wood ticks." How awful that must have been. You know, you're a fresh-faced little country guy from Indiana. What have I done, you know? So I took that poem and I turned it into a song. Because it shows what it was like from the point of view of a CCC boy. They call us lousy wood ticks who love to drink and fight, but it's where the CCs are when fires break out at night. We are the most unruly crowd the Lord has ever made, but when the flood breaks o'er the dam, it's CC, grab your spade. They say we drive our trucks too fast and make a lot of noise, but when some mishap comes their way, it's called the CC boys. They say we're non-supporting and on the relief rolls, but it's hello, Mr. CC man, when we vote at the polls. Oh, call me Cedar Savage, I don't pay it no mind. Call me a brush monkey, you'll never hear me whine. Call me a stump jumper, it won't bother me a bit. But when you call me wood tick, it puts me in a fit. Yep. Oh, the things the CCs did. There's so many of them. Just too many. They did timber stand improvement. They cleared out thousands of acres of junk trees. They cleared underneath power lines. They built fire breaks on the sides of the roads. All kinds of projects. Well, there's a saying in camp that life began at 4 o'clock. And that meant time to go back to camp at 4 in the afternoon. And you had about an hour and a half before dinner time. And that's time to go to play some baseball, boxing, basketball, shoot some pool up at the rec building, maybe a game of horseshoes with your buddies. They like to play chess and checkers. They played poker. They had a lot of angles for making money. You could get a haircut for 10 cents. The fashion of the day were bell bottoms. Remember that, fellas? They'd slice, there's always someone for 15 cents. He'd slice your pants from the knee down and sew a piece of fabric in and turn your pants into bell bottoms. By the way, gals, I asked a fellow once, I said, if your girlfriend asked you to steal something in camp, what would it be? Oh, that's easy, a flour sack. Their girlfriends always wanted flour sacks because they would make clothes out of those. The second most popular was sugar. One fellow made money by writing love letters to guys' girlfriends. He had beautiful penmanship and flowery language. He said, one time I wrote the same letter to 3 girls who lived in the same town. Yeah, they happened to be best friends. It didn't work out so good. One fellow who was kind of clever, he made a beehive. He made a beehive out of wood, and there's a little latch door, and for a nickel, you could peek inside. And he wrote on the outside, there was a little sign, "Rare albino bees." Well, what he did, he had carved out all these letter B's and painted them white. Of course, nobody told the next guy because nobody wanted to give up the secret, you know. But now every camp had mascots: deer, dogs, fox, raccoons, flying squirrels, crows. My favorite mascot was Pete the deer up at 3 Lakes. And if you saw my poster in the hallway, it showed the cook holding the legs of this big buck, and that was Pete. Well, they found Pete in the woods with a broken leg. And the doctor set the leg, and they created a harness, and after 5 or 6 weeks it healed up. They nursed him back to health. And when they let Pete go, he wouldn't go. He was so domesticated, he stayed around camp. And he would go up to the kitchen every night and clack its hooves on the steps, demanding his evening supper. Sometimes he'd push his way in the screen door in the kitchen and eat the food right off the counter. But my favorite Pete story is he would let himself in the screen door of the bunkhouse, and if the boys were sleeping with their toes sticking out under the blankets, Pete would lick their toes. Dance halls until the CCs came to town. But they'd take an empty church, an empty city hall building, town hall building, and they would turn it into a dance hall for Saturday night. A woman up in Madison told me how, well, I'd go to the dance hall with my girlfriends on Saturday, and we would pair up with each other. We'd be on the dance floor, and the CC boys, they would line up against the wall. And they would make little hand signals and say, hey, can me and my buddy cut in on you two girls, across the floor, right? And the girls would kind of check them out. What do you think, Agnes? Well, Betty, I like the tall one. What do you think, Okay, let's give it a try. Then they'd nod, and those guys would come across the floor and cut in on them. So it was very, very discreet. So if they turned them down there, nobody was embarrassed, okay? But they had ways to meet the guys. And the guys had to be smart to meet the girls. One time these fellows were planting trees, and in the farm field next door, a young lady was shooting bows and arrows into bales of hay. Well, one of the guys went over during his break and asked her out to the movie. Oh, my dad won't let me go out with CCs. Yeah, but what if we happen to show up at the same movie on the same night? What if we happen to sit next to each other? He wrangled himself a date. You had to be smart. It was very competitive. One fellow who had to drive into town every day to pick up the mail told me, he said, I used to time my route to go by the high school when the girls were getting out. He said, I'd pull up to the curb and roll down the window. I had my uniform on and, hey, girls, and chat with them. Well, he found out where one young lady went to church. Well, guess who started to go to church on Sunday? Yeah, that's how he met his wife. Yep. You had to be aggressive. You had to be smart. I think one woman said it best. She said, I'll never forget, I was at an ice skating rink, and there were 3 CCC boys trying to tie my skates at the same time. Yeah. I was in Curtis, Michigan just a couple months ago, and a woman said, every marriageable age girl in my town married a CC boy. Why not? Who are you going to date? You got a couple dozen local hayseeds or 400 CC boys out there, who got some meat on their bones, they got some good clothing on their back, a little jingle in their pocket, and so they dated them, and they liked them. Well, there were a lot of reasons why the